Welcome to Narayana IS Academy. I'm Yogesh Kottawar and I'll be taking up the daily news analysis of The Hindu and Indian Express. I'll discuss 5 most important articles from these two newspapers in a comprehensive manner. The first article mentioned on page number 9 of The Hindu. It talks about the importance of Quad and BRICS. We need to understand both of these institutions and the dilemma India faces due to its foreign policy and its national interest. The next article mentioned on page number 15 of Indian Express. It talks about International Court of Justice. The court has said something about Israel and its occupation in the Palestinian territory. So we'll understand what is this International Court of Justice, its powers, its jurisdiction, and what the court has actually said. The next article is mentioned on page number 11 of The Hindu. It talks about PC Emulator. The Apple company has recently allowed PC Emulator to become part of its App Store. So we'll understand what is PC Emulator, its legal status. Does it pose any risk in the form of malware or something? We'll understand in brief. The next article mentioned on the page number 8 of The Hindu talks about female labor force participation. We're observing that in India, unemployment rate is very high, and the writer has tried to provide a perspective related to women's participation in the labor force and how it can lead to a good employment rate. The next article mentioned on page number 13 of Indian Express, it talks about critical mineral processing. We need to understand what are all these critical minerals, especially for India, and also we will focus specifically on the graphite, the natural graphite, synthetic graphite, and we'll understand it in brief. After the discussion of all these articles, we'll also discuss some practice questions so that you can get a brief idea about what kind of questions can be expected in examination from these articles. So let's get started. The first article talks about the importance of Quad and BRICS. Both of these groupings are very important from national interest and India's foreign policy perspective. So we'll understand them in detail. Also, India faces a dilemma due to its participation in both groupings. So we'll understand that too. If you look at the syllabus, GS paper 2 mentions about bilateral, regional and global groupings that India is part of. So it is very important article. So before we start with the article, I want all of you to look at this previous year question, which says Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, that is Quad, is transforming itself into a trade bloc from a military alliance in present times. Discuss. So in 2020, this question was asked and you will be in a position to answer such question after understanding this article. So let's start with the article. What is the context? So recently a Quad foreign ministers meeting was held in Japan, and this meeting was held after a gap of 10 months, which shows its importance in the current scenario. So the discussion is going on between Quad and BRICS, and are both of these groupings important for India? Now first of all, what is Quad or Quadrilateral Security Dialogue? It's a simple grouping or coalition of 4 countries which includes India, Australia, United States of America and Japan. And if you look at these 4 countries, all of these are democracies and they share mutual interest when it comes to international economics and international politics. You need to go back to history. At the time of World War II, we observed that the entire world was devastated. And the world came to the conclusion that we need some international organization and rules which can govern the international world. We need to understand that at national level, we have a government. At state level, we have a government. But at the international level, we do not have any world government. And because of that, we saw world war happening. So countries decided that we'll form international organization and a world order. But that world order was led by United States of America. Now that world order includes all the organizations, all the rules that will be important for the world governance. Now what is happening at this time is that some other countries have emerged and they are asserting their power, which includes specifically China. China is saying that we will not follow the rules made by these countries and we will build our own world order. Now because China has become so powerful that it is asserting its power in South China Sea, in Indian Ocean, in the Indo-Pacific region, many countries have become concerned. And this includes these 4 countries. So these 4 countries decided that we will come together and we will counter this Chinese presence. And that's why we observe the formation of this group called Quad. Now, if you look at the concept of Quad, it was firstly brought in 2007 by Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. At that time, Australia was very much concerned on us that we cannot be part of such group. So Australia withdrew from this grouping. But after 10 years, that is in 2017, the group got revived and all the 4 countries decided that we will form a strong group in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, why we are talking only about Indo-Pacific region is that earlier, entire geopolitics was focused on the Atlantic region. If you look at Atlantic, on western part there is North America, on eastern part there is Western Europe, and most of the world trade was being done in this region only. But right now, if you observe the world economics, the trade is more or less focused on Indo-Pacific region. So this region has become more important in the world politics. Now, if you look at the objectives of Quad, it includes maritime security. That is, when you look at the oceans or the maritime region, there should be security in that region. For example, if a ship is going from one region to another in the Indo-Pacific region, China should not say that will not allow you to go from here. For example, if a ship is moving from South China Sea, China may claim that the entire South China Sea is ours, so will not allow you to go from there. So there should be freedom of navigation and overflight in the Indo-Pacific region. This is what Quad wants. Secondly, they want to counter Chinese influence, especially when it comes to its militarization. China is building its military camps in different regions, so these countries are concerned about it. Thirdly, there should be regional security and there should be rules-based international order. We said that some rules were established. For example, there is a treaty called UN Clause. The treaty brings some rules about the maritime region, but China is saying will not follow this treaty at all. So these 4 countries, India, Japan, Australia and USA, they want there should be a fixed rule set through which the international order should be governed. The next part is about economic cooperation. Now you need to understand that Quad is not just about the security or military part, but it also includes economic cooperation. For example, we observed recently that there was a trade war between China and United States of America. We observed COVID happening. We observed multiple wars taking place, due to which recession is going on in the world. So now what is important for us to understand is that if we will be dependent on China for anything in economic terms, we will always be fearful of Chinese influence. So USA, India, Japan and Australia wants that we should not be dependent on China when it comes to our economics. We already observed that China has become the hub of manufacturing of entire world. Whatever has to be manufactured in the world is being taken place only in China. So everyone has become dependent. And now we are disintegrating our economy from China. So when you disintegrate, you need some other partners. And for us in the Indo-Pacific region, these 4 countries can become mutual partners for themselves. So we can cooperate in the digital infrastructure, critical technologies, health, power, semiconductors, etc. Now, you look at this Indo-Pacific region just for an understanding of how many countries are part of it. Okay, you can look at India's role when it comes to Quad. India does not look at Quad only from security perspective, but also technological and economic perspective. India wants that its technology should be advanced. Its economy should grow with a good pace. And for that, we need integration with these allies in the form of USA, Japan or Australia. So you observe our relations with USA are developing. They are becoming better with time, and this is benefiting India in strategic and economic way. Now moving forward, we will talk about BRICS. The term BRICS means Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. What we have observed after 1990 specifically is that some countries in the Eastern world have grown exponentially in economic terms, and whoever is good in economy will be good in politics when it comes to international floor. So these 5 countries, if you look at it, these 5 countries are considered to be emerging economies. When we say emerging, that means after few years, these countries will have a very good contribution to the world GDP. Right now, if you say the world GDP is more or less contributed by the Western countries, especially the G7 countries. But in few years, you will observe that these five countries will dominate the international economy. Now, in 2001, economist Jim O'Neill, he coined this term called BRIC, which obviously did not include South Africa. And after that, in 2006, these four countries came together and formed a formal organization called BRIC. Then after some years, that is in 2010, South Africa joined this organization, making it BRICS. Now, what are its objectives? Firstly, they want to reform the multilateral institutions. When I say multilateral institutions, you can look at United Nations, you can look at World Bank, IMF, or World Trade Organization. You will observe one thing, that these organizations have a power structure which is concentrated in the hands of either USA or its Western allies. That means the Western worlds dominate in World Bank, IMF, and all these multilateral institutions. Now, India, China, or these countries do not like such structure. So we are saying that such multilateral institutions should be reformed and it should be democratic. And the countries who are powerful right now, like India, China, they should also have decent power in these structures. Secondly, it talks about economic cooperation among these five countries, because they have a good economic potential, so they can grow economically and they can become dependent on each other. Thirdly, they are talking about Global South, because the earlier world order, which was led by USA, it focuses on the world's northern part or the global north. But now, this BRICS can become a voice for the Global South, or the countries which are usually considered as developing or underdeveloped world. Moving forward, when you look at the BRICS, what it is actually doing, it is parallelly building a different structure in economic terms. You can see there is World Bank and there is IMF already existing as a part of international economic world order. If there is any economic crisis, IMF tries to help any country. If you want to make some developmental plans, World Bank helps you. What BRICS has done, they have built a parallel organizational setup in which, just like World Bank, they have brought New Development Bank, that is NDB. Then just like IMF, they have bought CRA, that is Contingent Reserve Arrangement. So they are trying to build a parallel economic order altogether. But if you look at the things from Indian perspective, this BRICS architecture can become a challenging architecture for India in such a way that if China starts dominating in these organizations or groupings, then it will be against India's national interest. Now, moving ahead, look at the dilemma India is facing right now. Because India is the only country which is part of Quad as well as BRICS. Now, this Quad is more or less led by USA or Western world, and this BRICS is led by the Eastern world, more or less we can say China-led. Now, here India is in a dilemma whether we should be part of this one group or the second group. Both groups are very important for us. You can look at this thing. Quad is helping us build our economic structure, build our strategic structure in such a way that it provides us security in the maritime domain. It will help India to build a coalition of friends who will help India in countering Chinese aggression. And now, on the other hand, BRICS helps us in curbing the domination of Western world that already exists in the multilateral institutions. So what we are saying is that for India, both of these groupings are important, and we cannot say that we will have to compromise one for the other. Now look at India's foreign policy. We are always trying to bring independent foreign policy and have a strategic autonomy. That means if we are becoming friend of USA, that doesn't mean we will follow whatever USA says. Rather, we will have strategic autonomy. So you can observe when it comes to Ukraine war, entire Western world is criticizing Russia, but India is not criticizing Russia. So we are trying to build that strategic autonomy. And while maintaining participation in both of these groupings, India needs to be a bit cautious. India needs a pragmatic approach. How? We observe that BRICS was earlier made up of 4 countries, then became 5 countries, and now BRICS is expanding. So many other countries are becoming part of BRICS. So India needs to be very pragmatic and try to ensure that India has good relations with these new countries which become part of BRICS, so that India can balance both Quad as well as BRICS. That means both Western world and the Eastern world. So in conclusion, we can say we need to be actively engaging in both groupings, and we cannot afford to downplay one for the other. Even if both Quad and BRICS are very distinct, they have different objectives altogether. But if you look at from India's national interest perspective, these are offering a complementary platform for us. The next article talks about Israel-Palestine conflict. Recently, International Court of Justice, that is ICJ, has given its opinion on the Israel's occupation of Palestinian land. So we need to study about International Court of Justice, its powers, its functions, its jurisdiction, and what the court has said about Israel's occupation. If you look at the syllabus, in prelims, it talks about current events of international importance, and from mains perspective, GS paper 2 talks about important international institutions, and ICJ is one of them. Now, before moving on to the article, let's look at one of the previous year question. It says, Rule of Law Index is released by which of the following? First, Amnesty International, International Court of Justice, the Office of UN Commissioner for Human Rights, and World Justice Project. So you can expect some factual questions from such topics. Let's look at the article. The context is that International Court of Justice has declared that whatever territory Israel has occupied in the Palestinian region, which land? Specifically West Bank and the East Jerusalem. This occupation is completely illegal. It goes against the international law, and that's why Israel should leave this land as soon as possible. Now, if we locate these regions on the map, you see this is the map of Israel. Here you see one river called River Jordan, and the western part of that river, western bank of that river is named as West Bank. And here you observe the region of East Jerusalem, the eastern part of Jerusalem city. And here the region of Gaza, which is in news since the Hamas conflict has started. Now moving forward, which was earlier part of Palestinian territory, but this is not something new that is happening. Israel is occupying this land since many years. If you look at the map of 1946, whatever green region you are observing in this map, this territory belongs to Palestine, and only this white portion, which is very small portion, it belongs to Israel. But the map of today or the present map shows different scenario altogether. This white territory which belongs to Israel has increased, and the Palestinian territory is very small right now. Now, if you look at the West Bank and Jerusalem specifically, these areas were taken up by Israel in 1967 in the Six-Day War from the Jordan. And since then, this land belongs to Israel. Now, what has happened recently is that in 2022, United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution. The resolution said that we should take opinion of the International Court of Justice on this particular issue. We should check whether Israel's occupation is legally correct or it is completely illegal. And that's why this case has gone to International Court of Justice. Now, what is International Court of Justice? It is a judicial organ of United Nations. You look at United Nations, it includes 6 principal organs. That is General Assembly, which is like the Parliament. Then there is Security Council, which is like the executive organ. Then there is Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, UN Secretariat, and the International Court of Justice. So just like we have judiciary in India, there is International Court of Justice when it comes to United Nations. And this court is also called as World Court. How this International Court of Justice actually functions, it takes up any case from the governments if there is a dispute. For example, India and Pakistan has some problem, one of the government reaches out to International Court of Justice, then that case will be taken up by ICJ. Then there is one other case that is called as advisory case. In this case, any organ of United Nations or any specialized body of United Nations can go to ICJ and say, sir, we do not have any clarity on the laws, international laws. In that case, ICJ can provide its advisory or opinion. And this is the case of Israel that we are discussing right now. Moving ahead, if you look at the headquarters, It is at The Hague in the Netherlands. If you look at the official languages that are used in the International Court of Justice, it includes English as well as French. And the structure of the organization is such that there are total 15 judges and each judge serves for total 9 years. Now these judges are not selected but rather elected. The election takes place in United Nations General Assembly as well as Security Council separately but simultaneously. And the candidate who gets absolute majority, only that candidate will become the judge of ICJ. And if ICJ gives any decision, any order, those orders or decisions are binding and final. No country can actually oppose or go against it. And you cannot even go for any appeal as such. In case we do not like the decision of High Court, we go to Supreme Court. But here you cannot go for appeal to any other court. There is only ICJ. Moving ahead, if you look at the limitations of International Court of Justice, you see that there is a jurisdictional limit, that only if a state or a country reaches out to ICJ, then only it can take up the case. It cannot take up any case on its own or suo motu. That's a limit. Secondly, there is challenge with enforcement. Even if a decision or order is given, the ICJ cannot enforce it. It doesn't have any police as such. Why? Because on international floor, there is no government as such. So it relies on United Nations Security Council to enforce that order or decision. Thirdly, there is limitation of scope. How? If you want to file a case against an individual or against a non-state entity like a terrorist organization or an MNC, you cannot do that when it comes to ICJ. ICJ will only take up cases where only government is involved. And next is it is not an apex court. For any country, the highest court is the Supreme Court of that country. For India also, Supreme Court is the apex court. There is no court beyond this. Now moving ahead, we'll look at what is occupation as per international law. Now if we read the Hague Convention of 1907, the Article 42 of this convention provides the definition of occupation specifically. It says, territory is considered occupied when it is placed under authority of a hostile army. Hostile means one whom you consider enemy. So if an enemy army occupies your land, that is considered to be occupation. But if someone has occupied your land, that doesn't mean your sovereignty has been transferred to them. It doesn't happen. This occupation is meant to be temporary only. It is for a very short time period. And in this time period, there is some obligation on that country's army or that country that they have to ensure that the basic needs of the population living in that region is taken care of. Also, you cannot send your civilian population in that region. For example, if Pakistan occupies some territory of India, Pakistan cannot actually send its civilian citizens to that region. So this is the obligation under the international law. But what is happening in case of Israel is very different. You look at the occupation is prolonged and it doesn't seem to be temporary as such, because since yes, it is continuing. And the settlement policy of Israel is also very different. Israel is continuously transferring its own civilians in that region of West Bank and East Jerusalem. Also Israel is confiscating the land which is there in this region. And Israel is applying its own law in this region. And we are saying all this is against the international law. Moving ahead, we observe that there is a systematic discrimination taking place against Palestinians based on race, religion, or ethnic origin. And this is also against international law. You can see these conventions like International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. So if you read all these conventions, you will understand that whatever Israel is doing is completely against these conventions. Apart from that, there is something called right to self-determination. India got its independence from British Raj. Why? Because India asserted its right, that is called right to self-determination, that we will determine our future. We will determine whether we will be sovereign or we will be under some other authority. So this right to determination is also violated as Palestinian people are not getting this right. So in conclusion, what International Court of Justice has said is that Israel must immediately end its illegal occupation. And this judgment is not just about Israel. This judgment is also about other countries. Court said that no other country should actually recognize this occupied territory belonging to Israel as such. And also, no country is going to help or assist Israel in maintaining this occupied territory. So, there are some obligations on other countries too. Now, one important thing about this advisory opinion from International Court of Justice, that is, it is not binding or enforceable as such. That means legally it is not binding on Israel to do this. But there is some moral or legal weight that it carries. There will be moral responsibility put on Israel, and that will build pressure on Israel to end its illegal occupation. The next article talks about PC emulator. Recently, Apple company has allowed the use of PC emulator on its app store. For exam, we need to understand what is emulator and the risk associated with it in the form of malwares. From the exam perspective, you can see the syllabus of GS paper 3, which includes awareness in the field of IT and cyber security. Now, before moving on to the article, look at this previous year question, which says the terms WannaCry, Petya, Eternal Blue, sometimes mentioned in the news recently, are related to what? Exoplanets, cryptocurrency, cyber attacks, or mini satellites. So if you simply read such articles, you will get the idea that this is all about cyber attacks. So let's move on to the article. As I said, Apple has approved the use of PC emulator. So first of all, we need to understand what is emulator. Emulator is a software which can emulate. That means it can imitate like a different software altogether. Normally what happens is that if you have Android operating system working in your device, in that case you can run softwares which are only made for the Android operating system. But let's say you want to run an application which was made for Windows operating system and you want to run it in your Android operating system. In that case, you need emulator software. This emulator will provide similar kind of environment in this operating system so that it can operate like a different operating system altogether. So we can say it's a very important software. In this case, there are some risks associated with these emulator softwares. Let's say, for example, you downloaded an emulator software from an unofficial website. In that case, there is a chance that one malware is attached to this emulator software and that has also got downloaded in your device. In this case, now what is malware? It is called as malicious software. It is a software which has been intentionally developed to damage your system. So if I send a malware to your device, then I want to damage your device altogether. It can come in different forms. It can be a virus, a worm, a Trojan horse, spyware, or adware. You can understand in brief, a virus is similar to a COVID virus. It gets into a computer system and it spreads. A worm enters into the network without requirement of any other file as such. It can enter on its own. The Trojan horse, it is like a legitimate software altogether. Means when you are downloading a Trojan horse, it will look like a licensed version of that software. In reality, it will be a malware. Then spyware, it will try to spy your systems. So your camera, your documents, everything will be spied by this malware. And there is adware, it will automatically deliver some advertisements on your device. So such malwares can be observed. Now there are some notable examples which are very infamous for causing damage to systems throughout the world. For example, WannaCry, Stuxnet, Zeus, Petya. These all have caused many problems in the computer systems throughout the world. Now if we look at the legality or the legal status of emulators in India, we observe that India has not specifically banned these emulators as such. But there is a problem. In case you are using an emulator software without having the proper license or ownership, then there will be some problem because the copyright related laws, intellectual property related laws do not allow such usage. So you should have original copy of the software and then you can use emulator as a backup. The next article talks about female labor force participation rate and how it can be used to counter unemployment which is continuously increasing in India. For us, it is important to know what is labor force participation rate and the present unemployment condition that exists. If you look at the syllabus, it mentions about employment specifically in the GS paper 3. So the article is very important. We can look at one previous year question asked in 2015 mains. It says the nature of economic growth in India in recent times is often described as jobless growth. Do you agree with this view? Give arguments in favor of your answer. To answer such questions, you need to have a brief idea about the unemployment condition that exists in the country. Now, what is the context? We are observing that unemployment rate in India is very high. And to counter this unemployment rate, we can use female labor force participation rate. This is what being said by a recent study. Now, if we increase this labor force participation rate of women, we can actually increase family income of people living in the rural part of India. But to understand this article, we need to understand what is labor force participation rate. You look at economic structure of any country, you will find that not all individuals can actually become part of the economic structure. Let's say, for example, in India, 140 crore people are part of the population, but only the people who are in the age bracket of 15 to 64, they are actually considered as people who can actually contribute in the economy. So we call them working age population. Now, out of this working age population, not everyone is actually part of the labor force. What happens is that there are three types of people. One who is actually looking for a job and the person gets a job. So now the person has become part of the economic structure. Second type of individuals are those who are looking for job but they are not getting the job. They are in the phase of struggle. They are still unemployed. But we can say after some time they will become part of the economic structure. But there is this third kind of people. These individuals are those who are not at all interested in getting into any job. They just want to sit idle and they don't want to become part of the labor force. We can say, for example, Indian women. After marriage, Indian women are expected to sit at home and not become part of the economic structure as such. So what we'll do is that we'll take the entire working age population and we'll remove this third part and we'll only take up these individuals who are either working or they are seeking or they are available for work. And if we calculate this, then we get the labor force participation rate. Now, if we simply consider the female part of it, then it is female labor force participation rate. Now, look at the current employment scenario. In India, we observe unemployment as well as underemployment. Unemployment means you're not getting the job. Underemployment means you have done PhD, but you are getting into a job which is made for clerk, very lower position. So in India, you can see in 2000 and 2012, the unemployment rate was 2%. In 2019, it is 5.8%. And in 2022, it is 4.1%. It is considered to be a very high unemployment rate. Then if you look at the labor force participation rate, overall labor force participation rate, you see that it is actually falling. So in 2000, it was 61%. In 2018, it was 49.8%. In 2022, it was 55%. So we see the trend that it is actually falling. But if you look at the female labor force participation rate, it is actually rising. So if we get into the figures specifically, in rural India, it is increasing in this way that 24% it was in 2018 and in 2022 it was 36%. In urban areas, if you look at it, it seems 20.4% in 2018. Now you may say that the rate is increasing, which is a very good thing, but you cannot be very complacent with this. Why? Because if you look at the global average is 53.4% and where we are standing at 36 or 20% only. So we actually need to work on the female labor force participation. First of all, if you increase the labor force participation rate of women, there will be more people in the workforce. So there will be more competition, there will be more productivity. And if there is any employment gap as such, for example, in a sector, the demand for people is very high, but people are not there or people do not have much skills. In that case, we can fill those employment gaps in a good manner. Apart from that, there will be dual income households. Women will also earn. So in that case, family income will rise and that will benefit the entire structure. If you look at West Bengal, in West Bengal, many women are part of farming, pisciculture, vermicomposting. And as a result, what we have observed is that there is improvement in the family welfare and there is reduction in the migration. Because when only one person in the family works, there are chances that the person needs to migrate to another place for the sake of employment or economic activities. Now, how we can actually increase this female labor force participation rate? First of all, we need to address the gender specific employment. For example, we see that women are considered to be good for home based work and they should not go outside. We need to remove this stereotype and we need to empower women to become part of the non traditional economic activity structure. Apart from that, we can encourage self-help groups, we can provide training and skill development to the women organizations, and also we can ensure that the workplace where the women is going to work, there should be security in such a way that any women will not be harassed over there. The next article talks about critical minerals. We need to study what are critical minerals and we'll focus our discussion on one of the minerals called graphite. If you look at the syllabus, GS paper 3 mentions economic growth and mobilization of resources, and critical minerals are one of those resources. We can look at one of the previous year question to get an idea about what kind of questions can be asked in the examination. With reference to the management of minor minerals in India, consider the following statements. Sand is a minor mineral according to the prevailing law in the country. State governments have the power to grant mining leases of minor minerals, but the powers regarding the formulation of rules related to the grant of minor minerals lie with the central government. Third, state governments have the power to frame rules to prevent illegal mining of minor minerals. So you can expect such factual questions from these topics. Let's move ahead with the context. We are observing that since few years, we are trying to transition towards renewable energy. Earlier, we used to depend on non-renewable sources like the petroleum products, like petrol, diesel. We use those sources and now it has led to a scenario wherein we are observing the phenomena of climate change and global warming. So now our focus lies on renewable energy. Now to transition towards renewable energy sources, we are trying to develop electric vehicles. These electric vehicles will not use petrol or diesel, but rather they will make use of some batteries. For example, lithium-ion batteries. So there will not be any vehicular emission as such. Now these lithium-ion batteries require a specific mineral without which you cannot develop any such battery, and that is your graphite. And we are calling this graphite as a critical mineral, and that's why we are discussing about critical minerals. So what is a critical mineral? If you look at any country, if any mineral that becomes very important for that country, then it is a critical mineral. But important in which perspective? You can look at the economy of that country. If there is a sector which is booming in that country and the sector depends on a particular mineral, if the supply of that mineral is disrupted because of any reason, then the economy of that country may get damaged or may see a recession. Or maybe we can take another example in which national security of that country may get hampered. For example, a country is trying to develop a missile or satellite or something, and for that they require a specific mineral, and for that mineral they are dependent on other country. In that case, if the supply of that mineral is disrupted, the national security might get compromised. So we are calling any such mineral as critical mineral, and it becomes critical because the resources of those minerals are not so abundant in that country. So country might be dependent on other countries. In this case, we see that every country releases a list of critical minerals which are very critical for their country, and the list might differ from country to country. If you look at India in 2023, India released a list of 30 critical minerals. You can see the list which includes antimony, beryllium, bismuth, cadmium, etc. etc. Now out of these, we are specifically going to focus on graphite, but please understand, out of the total 30, there are 10 critical minerals for which India is very much dependent on other countries. You see, India is a net importer of 10 out of these 30 designated minerals. Now, we'll talk about graphite. Now, graphite is made up of carbon, but it is of two types. One is natural graphite, other one is synthetic graphite. We'll talk about natural one. This natural graphite is found in the metamorphic rock that exists in the crust of the earth. And these are very cheap because you just need to mine those rocks and you will find these graphite in those rocks. Now, if you look at the performance of this graphite, it is moderate. It is very average. You cannot expect a really good performance from this natural graphite. And the structure, which is crystalline, is not so good for our application, which we'll be using in our batteries. Moving ahead, if you look at the environmental impact, the natural graphite will not have much environmental impact as such. And if you look at the market trend, anyone who is making use of these natural graphite, because the performance is relatively moderate, they will try to make use of synthetic graphite and make a blend of natural and synthetic to make use of it in the batteries. But if you compare it with the synthetic graphite, we develop this in the laboratory. We take the carbon and put it in the 3000 degrees Celsius condition. So temperature is very high. In that condition, carbon gets converted into this synthetic graphite. But this process is very expensive. You will do this in your manufacturing setup or in the laboratory. But its performance is really good. Whenever you are using any electric vehicle, you can use synthetic graphite. It will provide a really good performance. And if you look at its structure, it is very much engineered. We are building its structure, so we will make it according to our own needs. And look at the environmental impact. This synthetic graphite has a very high environmental impact. But if you look at the cost benefit, you'll see that synthetic graphite is still beneficial. Why? Because you are using it to build electric vehicles. That will reduce your emissions on a very large scale. So it's still beneficial. And as we said, its performance is really good. So for the application in the electric vehicles, synthetic graphite is the best. Now let's discuss some of the practice questions. The first question is, consider the following statements regarding natural and synthetic graphite. First statement is, natural graphite is derived from flake graphite mined from the earth, while the synthetic graphite is produced by converting carbon into graphite at high temperatures. Now this is a fact and that's why it is correct. Second statement, high-end electric vehicles typically use natural graphite due to its superior performance compared to synthetic graphite. Absolutely wrong. Rather, synthetic graphites show really good performance. Third, synthetic graphite is generally cheaper than natural graphite and is often used in energy storage systems to reduce cost. This is absolutely wrong. Rather, the natural graphite is very cheap, and for synthetic graphite, you need to go for expensive procedure. So only statement 1 is correct, that is A is the answer. The next question is about emulators. Consider the following statements regarding emulators and malware. First, emulators are softwares that enable a device to run applications designed for different operating systems or previously incompatible devices. This is absolutely correct. Second, malware is software intentionally designed to enhance the performance of computer or network by removing viruses or improving security. This is absolutely wrong. Rather, malware will try to bring in some virus and try to ensure that your system gets damaged. Third, in India, using emulators to run software without proper licenses or ownership is considered legal under fair use provisions. This is also wrong. We need a proper license or proper ownership. Without that, we will not allow it. So even third statement is wrong. So only statement 1 can be considered as correct. So option A is right. Next question is about labor force participation rate. Which of the following best defines the labor force participation rate? First, the percentage of people in the population who are employed. No. Apart from employed, some people who are unemployed, they are also part of it. So it is wrong. Second, the ratio of employed persons to the total working age population. No, it is also incorrect. Third, the percentage of working age population that is either employed or actively seeking the work. This is the right definition. Fourth, the number of people employed in the formal sector relative to total labor force. This is absolutely wrong. So we can say option C is the right answer. Next question. With reference to the International Court of Justice, consider the following statements. First, it is not part of the United Nations but a completely independent institution. Absolutely wrong. Rather, it is one of the important organ of United Nations. Second, ICJ cannot take up a case on its own initiative. That is absolutely true. Third, ICJ orders are legally binding. That is also true. Its decisions, its orders are binding. Its opinion is not binding. Next, ICJ cannot adjudicate disputes between individuals. This is also true. It can only take up cases in which one party is one government, other party is another government. Individuals cannot go for any such case as such. Then next, ICJ judgments are final and not subject to appeal. That is also absolutely correct. So only one is wrong, all other statements are right. So option C, only 4 is the right answer. Moving ahead, the next question, which of the following best defines critical minerals? Minerals that are rare and only found in specific regions? No. Minerals essential for modern technologies, economies, national security with risk of supply chain disruption. This is the right definition. Third, minerals used primarily in the construction industry? No. Minerals that have substitutes and are not essential for high value manufacturing? No. So the answer is B. Now next is a mains practice question. The question says, discuss the strategic significance of India's dual membership in both Quad and BRICS and how it shapes India's foreign policy in the current geopolitical landscape. Now when you get such a question, in the introduction, try to show India's dual membership first. So you can briefly introduce about Quad, about BRICS, and then show that India is the only country in the world who is part of both organizations. The other way you can also introduce is that by mentioning the current geopolitical context, the meeting that was held very recently. Now after that, in the body, because the question has asked about strategic significance, so you will divide the answer in this way, that you will first talk about Quad significance and then about BRICS significance. How Quad actually helps us in countering Chinese influence, Chinese aggression. So for security, it is very important. And when it comes to BRICS, it helps us in reforming multilateral institutions and also for economic cooperation. So when you show this strategic significance, move ahead with how it shapes India's foreign policy. So show that India has been using a balancing act. India is trying to maintain its strategic autonomy, and this dual membership is very important for India. Also, in conclusion, you should mention about the pragmatic approach that India can follow, and India can ensure its national interest by being member of these two groupings and also actively participating in both of these groupings. So this is all for now. For more updates, please like, share, subscribe to the Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel and stay updated.